Good morning, afternoon slash evening, everyone in all the time zones that you are at, and welcome to the event States of Control, Who is in Control, by TOK Curator Collective, who will run this event right after I'm done with this brief introduction. We begin, as always, by acknowledging that the Weisman Art Museum is located on the traditional and contemporary land of the Dakota people. We aspire to honor and respect the indigenous peoples past, present, and future by incorporating indigenous knowledge in our work and establishing meaningful reciprocal relationships with the carriers of indigenous knowledge and with communities. I am Boris Soikerman. I am CND&J Ehlenfeld Curator for Creative Collaboration at the Weisman Art Museum on the Twin Cities campus of the University of Minnesota. I curate the program of the Target Studio for Creative Collaborations, which supports artistic projects that cross disciplines, institutions, sectors, communities, cultures, and geographies, pretty much like this one. Before we begin, I would like to thank the voters of Minnesota, first of all, for voting today and for supporting the operational budget of our museum through the funds from the Minnesota State's Arts Board. The Target Foundation for funding the construction of the Studio for Creative Collaboration that I curate. And thank you to Cindy and Jay Illenfeld for the endowment that pays my salary here. I'm grateful to my colleagues at the Weisman Art Museum for supporting the program for creative collaboration that I lead and for making this event happen. When speakers share their presentations, I recommend you choose Fit to Window option from the view options at the top center of your Zoom screen to make sure you see the entire presentation. If you require live transcription, please choose that option at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And the last note, this event is part of the Election Day program of the Weisman Art Museum. I would like to invite you tonight to the America Election Comedy Night curated by New Yorker artist Wafa Bilal. The details for that are on the website. Now we'd like to invite Maria Veits and Anna Bitkina of the TOK Collective to lead the event.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you,
Boris.
Boris. Thank you very much for hosting us, and thank you to Weisman and to Target Studio. It's been a long way towards this event. I will just very briefly talk about what TOK is, and Anya can briefly talk about the project. So for those who are not familiar with our practice, Creative Association of Curators TOK is a nomadic, as we call ourselves, curatorial collective that was founded in St. Petersburg in 2010 as a platform for research projects that happen at the intersection of contemporary art and social sciences. And we work in different geographies and we land in different contexts. We don't have our own space, but we rather place our practice between historical analysis and political imagination. And our multi-layered projects are mostly durational and cross-disciplinary. And in their framework, we try to always generate some new knowledge about the causes and consequences of changing political realities. We often work outside of usual art spaces, trying to infiltrate into social structures that kind of shape our reality and shape our future. So we try to kind of unveil the mechanisms that are behind local governance, public spaces, educational system, and other social institutions. We work a lot also with the research of public space, of post-Soviet public space in particular, and try to explore how social institutions transform. And media and media strategies have been in our focus for quite a few years by now. And this focus and this interest has been expressed through one of our long-term projects, States of Control. And I'm inviting my colleague Anya to talk a little bit about the project and why we're here tonight.
The practice of talk is very often is durational. So we have projects that are lasting for several years. The longest our project exist and ongoing and developing and reshaping for like 10 years. States of Control, the impulse for States of Control and shaping up this platform was the changing media and political landscape after annexation of Crimea in 2014 and escalation of this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So during that time, almost instantly, we've been noticing how the discourse in media and in some institutions, political and social institutions, becoming very polarizing, very much reminding the Cold War narrative, but of course with all other layers and complications of the contemporary reality. So since then, we've been sharpening up and putting together different aspects of this discourse under the umbrella of States of Control project, which is very much about contested political history, manipulative media strategies, and technological development embedded into governmental control. The project has been landing so far on the contents in Europe and now in the US. So it's first shape, it's first, I think, iteration or first time we presented tangible results of the research was during our residency in Iflux factory in New York back in 2016. And after that, we've been invited to conduct exhibition and performative program in Helsinki. And then after that, we came to Minneapolis, invited by Weisman Museum and Target Studio for Creative Collaboration, which Boris is the head of. And during our research back in 2018, exactly 2 years ago, because we visited Minneapolis around the same time, and it was midterm election. And we've been talking to different people, and through this conversation and witnessing different situation, encountering with different institutions as well, we sort of sharpened up the content for this sort of other strand of research under the umbrella of States of Control project, and composed this event today, which we hope going to help us to understand the processes that are happening behind election process, to look at will give us possibility to think who are the political we, who are these constituencies that are following their political leaders, how in the situation of unresolved problems of the past, polarizing politics, segregated society, how we're looking at the situation and format of expressing and executing of political will. We have 6 speakers today. Each speaker came from very different background and from different life experiences. And we are very proud to have experts from art field, activism, journalism, cultural analysts, and also mass culture, popular culture. And everyone will be given 10 minutes, and people will go, speakers will go one after another. Masha and I will have a very quick introduction of each speaker. And after that, in the remaining time, we hope we will have about 30-40 minutes for Q&A.
Yeah, so we very much hope that the audiences are going to join the discussion, and there is room for asking questions, and we're going to be taking your questions that we will address after everyone's presentation. So I would like to introduce our first speaker, and this is Stephen Duncan. He is a long-term friend of TOK, and he has actually been witnessing the very beginning of the project.
Thank you so much for hosting this amazing event. And what I want to talk about in the next 10 minutes is the idea of using art as a form of political action. I'm going to share my screen with you at this point. Hopefully it will work. Let us try this. And let's see. So in a nod to our Russian friends here, I want to start with a very well-known piece of political art, which is Vladimir Tatlin's Monument to the Third International. And I love this piece of work because what it does is what political art does best, which is it opens the imagination to what is possible. The monument was absolutely unbuildable. It was unbuildable in 1919. It's still unbuildable now. It's structurally unsound. It's insane architecturally, but it opened the imagination to ask the most important question of politics, which is, what if? What if we could build something like this? What would the world be like? But 4 years later, Vladimir Tatlin designed this, which was a design for men's leisure suits. His comrade Varvara Stepanova made designs for sports clothing, and Alexander Rodchenko made box designs for Red October caramels. And so one of the things I'm also interested in is not just art as a way to expand and shift our perspective, but also to serve immediate utilitarian purposes. I work with an organization called the Center for Artistic Activism, and this election cycle, we were fortunate enough to have a funder to come to us and said, how would you like to curate a number of projects that had a direct impact on the voting, or we thought we could have a direct impact on the voting. We put out a public call, we got about 120 submissions, of which we picked 10, and we wanted these artistic submissions to do three things. We wanted them to work on getting out the vote, or combating misinformation, or combating voter intimidation. And we called this the Unstoppable Voters Project. And so I just want to share a couple of these with you. Most of them speak for themselves. They have short videos. But one of the first is from the Compton Cowboys. And let's see if this works. It does.
Fights have always been a long journey. It ain't something that happens overnight. I always felt like the cowboy represents being a force for some type of change, you know? Like a trailblazer. Somebody, when there wasn't a way, they made...
Oops, sorry. I'll get that going again.
Somebody, when there wasn't a way, they made one. They wasn't afraid to go out there and venture. Willing to ride or die for what you believe in. Don't take shit from nobody. Our whole livelihood is at stake. The future of our country is at stake. There's too much talking about it without enough action. Fuck talking. Go vote. Don't you want to do something about it?
All right, and this is a project. There's Black equestrian groups all across the United States. So while this is originally in Los Angeles, it's also happening in Maryland, North Carolina, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, and Chicago as well. Black riders getting out the vote, raising sort of idea of what it means to be active. Next one I want to look at is a bunch of circus performers. And this is a short video clip.
For some Arizonans, election season has turned into a circus. Literally, as you see here, a group of performers from Tucson bringing clowns, jugglers, acrobats, and more to Phoenix, all to promote voting this November. ABC 15's Liliana Soto has their story.
When people call politicians clowns, I actually get, it's like, don't insult clowns like that. Clowns are caring. They just want to make people laugh. That's it.
Clay Masing is a director of the Emergency Circus in Tucson. Their mission to spread hope and make you smile during the toughest times.
Well, since 2012, we've traveled all over the world to visit hospitals, refugee camps, along the U.S.-Mexico border. We've been to a bunch of post-hurricane shelters, post-disaster zones, all over, wherever there's under-circused people.
But on Saturday, they're bringing the show to the Pulse in Phoenix.
We're having this full-blown show in this amazing place, Heritage Square. And then we're gonna parade to the Pulse, which is just around the corner. We're gonna have a band and just kind of walk together down the street. And we're gonna have fun and vote.
The event is nonpartisan. Clay Mason says with 2 weeks left until Election Day, it's important to continue motivating people to vote.
Okay, I'll stop that there. They also have groups also doing this in Philadelphia, in North Carolina, Texas, and Oregon as well. Essentially leading people to the votes Pied Piper style. Another group that we've been working with and funding is called Float the Vote, and these out of Detroit. And what they've done is they've partnered with food truck owners and purveyors and turned food trucks into kind of local, both get out the vote, register to vote vehicles, kind of making them flamboyant. But the idea is bringing people in with food, but then getting them to register to vote. Today, they're going to be doing sort of a flotilla of a parade of food trucks going around the city and getting people to vote as well. Abram Finkelstein, which probably most people would know his work, he was the person who designed the Silence Equals Death, or one of the people who designed the Silence Equals Death triangle of ACT UP. We worked with him to create his own sticker, which has now been distributed around the whole country, kind of giving this graphic, both militant, but also ideally hopeful graphic to inspire people to get out and vote. I think this has a video attached to it. These are performers in Pennsylvania trying to assure people that voting by mail is safe. And so they do is they walk around, create a spectacle, and then talk to people, assuring them again that the disinformation they're receiving is just that, disinformation. And this is Packard Jennings, this is out of California, but these projections have now spread across the entire United States.
Yeah, spontaneous worldwide on the track, you know. With Medusa, the gangsta goddess. It's the rebirth and putting in work. Let's get it. Let's get one thing straight. I don't want your hands up, cause I'm liable to frisk ya. Please don't bow down, cause I'm liable to treat you like the queen that I am. Dub these and dismiss ya. So if you wanna put in work, put your fist in the air, hand over your heart, no matter how much it hurts.
But going to
let's walk
neighborhoods
side by side. Yeah, if you can't hear me clearly, got beef for feelings, and we need some eye-to-eye contact. While it's on my mind, respect to the mothers that carry babies in place of their backpacks. I can't wait till I'm able to do that. Who, me? I'm sent to kick truth, get the loot, the whole loop with the truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God, run it on them. I was told the strongest lyrical content lasts the longest. I'm on this, like 5%ers on their studies. Like when a woman is lied to, she'll act funny. Like we knew this day was coming. New sisters with hype like to make you act right. Bring us together, my type would be summons. And I got a question for those of you that ain't running. Do you wanna you wanna put in work, put your fist in the air, hand over your heart.
So can art effect and affect an election? We don't know. We will find out in a few hours, although we'll never know for sure, obviously. But what we are doing is we're now preparing for after the election. And because after the election is not going to be over tonight. We have 3 scenarios that we had these groups work with. One is the good news, which there's a clear winner, and the other side concedes. The other is bad news, which is riots and lawsuits. And then the more probable, which is no news, which is 2 weeks of waiting and counting votes. And so we've already started working with other groups to come up with strategies that they can do these sort of artistic interventions. And I'll share one with you right now to close out my presentation.
Hey, we are outside a Trump rally here in Pennsylvania, and Donald Trump has been saying that he wants to stop counting votes here in Pennsylvania on election night.
So we talked to some Trump supporters to see if they agree with that or if they actually want every vote counted.
Hey, how's it going?
We're trying to make sure all the votes get counted.
Basically, it's just saying that we want to count every single vote in Pennsylvania before victory is declared.
Sure. We know which candidate we're talking about is going to come in and try and steal this election.
If we don't count every vote, then it's not democracy, right?
Definitely.
Otherwise, it's a sham, right? It's a totally rigged thing if we don't count every vote, right?
Yep. Count the votes, declare the winner. Yes. That's all it is.
Count every vote, right?
Brother. Yep.
You can't declare victory until all the votes are counted, right? Count the votes! Count all the votes! Count all the votes! Count all the votes! Count all the votes! Count them all! Count all the votes!
Get out of here. So these are some of the projects that we're working on right now. Again, knowing the impact of what these have, we just don't know. And they are very instrumental. They're not high art. They're not necessarily expanding one's perception and possibilities of what if. They're very instrumental, and they're based around very particular objectives. But we also think that art can be a form of activism, and art has for many, many years worked in very instrumental ways. And so this is what we've been working on. I want to stop there because I want to hear what other people have to say as well.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yeah, I think this is very instrumental and also very easy to adapt to different contexts. And maybe in that respect, it might be very, very effective. From this very kind of practical approach, I want to move our conversation to maybe more theoretical ground and talk a little bit about the correlation between elections and democracy, because we're used to thinking that elections and voting is a democratic process. But why then, elections are being so used and malused by non-democratic processes? So what is the place of the election in a democratic and non-democratic society? And I hope Greg Uding, our next speaker, will help us address these issues. So Greg, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Masha, for inviting me and for this opportunity to speak at this interesting day. Well, I'm indeed interested in elections and plebiscites and all kinds of voting from a theoretical point of view, and this is probably the main reason this election is interesting. The ongoing election is interesting for me, just because it is largely an election about the election, with both sides worried that their opponents endanger the election itself, election as an institution, and probably even American democracy with it. That's why they try to convince people to vote in order to save democracy. And I think it's interesting to see how we put so much hope in this institution, in election. We believe that our future depends on the outcome of the election. We worship election and fear that it might be too fragile. We assume that democracy stands and falls with the election. And indeed, we got used to the idea that when we want the people to decide, we should take a vote. When we complain that these days there is too little power in the people, we think it would be democratic to let them vote on all major issues. And in that case, the US probably would have long had the healthcare for all, had the people voted on this issue directly. Now, this association between democracy and elections works on various occasions. For instance, how do we distinguish between the democratic and the non-democratic countries? It's fairly simple. If there are free and fair elections, then the regime is believed to be democratic. And sometimes we are even ready to concede that the regime is probably not really liberal, which is a different thing from being democratic. But still, if the majority votes in the support of the leader, we have to accept him or her. Usually it is him in that kind of regime, have to accept as a popular leader. Well, that means that we tend to identify democracy with elections. This is the most simple definition of democracy. Democracy is elections. Now, from the viewpoint of political theory, that all sounds rather odd. Since Aristotle's famous classification of regimes, we have learned that appointing magistrates through election is not democratic, but rather aristocratic or oligarchic. Well, Aristotle makes here a definitional point. Look, when we vote, we necessarily choose the best. Even if we want to be represented by someone who's resembling us as closely as possible, we still vote for the greatest similarity. And therefore, we end up by electing the best to rule. This is the rule of the best. And this is the textbook definition of aristocracy. That's why, of course, Aristotle is certain that vote or election is actually not a democratic institution. But there is, of course, a more straightforward argument. The most important fact about elections is that elections are always won by those who hold them. This is obvious in countries like Belarus these days, for instance, where it doesn't matter how people voted. The president who holds the elections tells the result. And this is probably less obvious in the countries like United States, where the election is held jointly by two competing parties, forming together the ruling elite. And the parties make sure that no contender will ever have a chance to win if not approved by the party establishment. And indeed, although in theory, at least in liberal democratic societies, everyone has equal rights to cast a ballot and to be elected, in reality, we know, of course, that election is the competition between the factions of the elite. The factions of this group of super rich and super influential people. And well, let's be honest, each of us has zero chance even to run. And therefore, election is, of course, an institution appropriate for the oligarchy, as opposed, for instance, to rotation, which is purely democratic, precisely because every citizen has equal chance to hold the office. And I think this gives a hint on why, in our age, when elections have spread all over the world as a key political institution, why this age is also the age of such impressive inequality. Politics organized through elections make sure that the power is held by the rich. So when we often hear them saying that the election is rigged, in certain sense, it is of course true. It has always been rigged. Election emerged over the last 2 centuries as a key tool for producing democratic legitimacy in non-democratic regimes. And this, I think, sheds some light on some other facts that we might otherwise find difficult to explain. For instance, the autocratic rulers often embrace the vote. Various practices of vote, such as elections, plebiscites, instead of trying to cancel it. I'm thinking here of Russia, of course, but not only of Russia, also of Hungary. I would be interested to learn more about the way elections and plebiscites are used in Turkey. There's also a very interesting case. But this is the case precisely because elections are perfectly fit for producing democratic legitimacy for the ruling elites. And that's why they tend to extend voting rather than suppressing it. Or take, for example, the falling turnout and the general disappointment in elections in so many countries all over the world. You remember, of course, that in 2016, when the election in the US had already been declared the most important election in American history, half of the voters chose to sit it out. This time, of course, it will be different for various reasons, but the general pattern holds. It is getting more and more difficult to get people out to vote, precisely because people have learned that the vote seldom changes anything at all. Well, we should probably ask, how did we get here? How democracy got electoralized? How did it happen that our democratic imagination got paralyzed by elections, so that it is difficult for us to think beyond the elections, to think of the ways to restore democracy other than holding more votes? Obviously, I have no time to answer these questions. It would take a long discussion about historical and theoretical foundations of our political regimes, but probably you will find these questions worth asking. Now, to wrap it up, I should make it clear that I'm definitely not trying to discourage you from voting, and particularly from voting today. After all, even if you're a Democrat, you shouldn't abstain categorically from using non-democratic institutions, because sometimes the people can take advantage of the elections and of the conflicts between the elites. So often, of course, voting makes sense. But the bottom line is that it would be unwise to identify the unraveling of the elections that we're witnessing recently. It would be incorrect to identify it with the crisis of democracy in general. It is rather the deficit of real democracy, of the feeling of popular rule, that makes us focus so much on the elections. And this feeling of not being represented, not being heard, of always being ruled and never ruling, this is the feeling that puts so much pressure on the election. And however important the outcome of today's general election can be, it is unfortunately not going to solve the issue of democracy, simply because this issue is not going to be solved through elections. Thank you.
Grisha, thank you so much for your short but sharp definition of election and how actually those processes are executed in contemporary society today. Our next speaker is Ayse Kavdar. So besides looking at the recent socio-political changes in Turkey, Ayse is also interested in religion, which is also a part of the process of governing in Turkey, and she's looking at the belief in the apocalypse in Islam. So she will talk also today now about the envy and resentment in the governing process in Turkey. Ayse, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I prepared a sort of talk for 20 minutes, but I will start from the second half after summarizing the first part in a couple of sentences. Thank you very much for the presentations. It gave me a lot of things to think about, especially the necessity or importance of elections in the democracy, because Turkey was always proud of how the participation in the elections is high. You know, we have never had an election with lesser than 85% participation in Turkey. But for now, after experiencing last year's, I should say the participation, the high participation rates to the elections shows there is no other way for the democracy. So it is not a good quality for democracy, because if people don't need to go to vote, it means maybe they have some other ways to have a say about their lives. That's why I'm not sure if pressing, highlighting the importance of vote is that much good. I wanted to talk about the tricks today, not about the tricks, but how the tricks, how the frauds in elections are legitimized in Turkey. First, I wanted to talk about the tricks, the types of tricks. There are three types of tricks that frauds actually I counted, I categorized. First is the monopolization of the media. By monopolizing media, the government has power to suspend the freedom of speech, actually, freedom of propaganda also. And it works a lot. According to the official numbers, there are thousands of media outlets in Turkey, but only 40 of them are, let's say, prominent in the scenery. And in the presentation, in the little picture, you can see those big dots. They are the media monopolies and how they are connected to the other sectors like construction, energy, also the mega projects planned and projected by the government and held by these companies. So how the media network is connected among each other also to the government. I also should add something else. Most of these media networks are also using World Bank money credits to build projects like bridges, thermal projects, also highways with the public-private partnerships. So it is like a kind of internationally funded monopolization of media, assisting the authoritarianism of Erdogan in Turkey. The second one is a kind of childish one, but it is very common in Turkey. It is repeated. It is done in almost every election. It is the play with the technicalities of the elections. I mean, you know, for example, changing the rules of the elections in just before the counting of the votes. For example, it happened in 2017 for the during the process of referendum for the constitution, and it was really, you know, obvious because until that election, it was the unstamped ballots were not counted in the elections, in the previous elections, but for that referendum, the electoral committee, the Supreme Electoral Committee, decided yes, they are valid, and then, you know, they got the constitution. But it is not very easy to constitute the legitimacy of the constitution and so on. You know what happens after that. The elections are not very good idea for kind of wounded and incomplete democracies, I should say, because each election becomes a kind of occasion for the ruling party, for the ruling powers, let's say, to consolidate their party organization, but also their affectual power, let's say, affectual or emotional power, emotional manipulation, because the atmosphere of election, the atmosphere of harsh competition for the power opens a lot of place for kind of manipulation of the emotions of the citizens. And in the second part, I want to talk about that. And these, I want to focus on two main feelings, that is envy and resentment. After here, I will try to read from my paper. Yeah, the third one, you know, how and why the ruler, why Erdogan, why the AKP is utilizing these emotions, I should say, it is to polarize the society. So you can create a sort of us and them division in society through those feelings. But those feelings, as long as they are legitimized with the how to say rewriting of history, legitimizing also the tricks, also the frauds over not only elections but also other democratic procedures. The political polarization in Turkey has two primary fault lines in that sense. First, religious versus secular, and the second, Turks versus non-Turks. There are more, but for our discussion, it is enough to mention today. Until 2015, especially after Gezi resistance in 2013, the AKP played with the religious versus secular fault line. For instance, when we are all in Gezi Park and many protests going on every single city of Turkey except my family's hometown, Bayburt, Erdogan said, I barely could keep my 50% home. It was his way to threat the secular half of the society. I will not discuss if he has 50% or not, and it doesn't matter, I think. This claim was enough to understand how he would continue with his leadership later. After the AKP understood the religious versus secular fault line is not enough to keep 50% with them, they began, since 2015, they began to utilize the second one, Turks versus everybody else. So welcome nationalism back. Frankly speaking, the second fault line has always been much more useful in Turkey. In their first years, the AKP tried to keep Kurds with them during the peace process, so-called peace process in Turkey, to fill the first fault line with more energy to slow down the effect of the Turks versus everybody else division. However, it didn't provide enough votes. I mean, the religiosity, secularity division was not enough powerful, was not enough strong. That's why they invited nationalism back to the show. Now I want to focus on two main political effects in these divisions. They are envy and resentment. Both of these effects are common and unfortunately easily shareable, as they are born in humanly comparisons. That is why they are political in their nature. Not resentment, but envy only in smaller doses could help us to institutionalize a just society. At least Helmut Schoeck, an Austrian-German sociologist, claims that thanks to their struggle to discipline the envy, humankind could invent the imaginations like democracy and socialism. But our problem, what does happen if we do not discipline envy? The worst case, if someone uses envy to gain political power. Envy is a little bit different than jealousy. While jealousy is all about to protect what belongs to us, envy focuses more on what others have. There's a Muslim moralist who lived in the 16th century, Kanalizade Ali Efendi, in his masterpiece, Ahlak-ı Ala, the Sublime Morality. He writes that envy is possible, this is very interesting, only among the equals. It happens when equals compare themselves to each other. This equality seems, in Turkish, we call it haset, so it is from Arabic. This equality seems all about legal or moral conditions, like we are all humans or citizens, so why should some people be more prosperous than others? But when I look at what Ali Efendi wrote a little bit closer, I found it is not that much very easy. He is talking about equal conditions, not about rights and responsibilities. For example, he says those people live in different cities or gain their lives with different professions, do not envy each other. They could admire or emulate to the ones in better conditions. For the poor, they could feel compassion, or they could be afraid from or hate from poorer or richer. But these are different feelings. Envy happens among the similars who equally share something. For Melanie Klein, envy begins among siblings as they share their mother's breast. For Ali Efendi, envy is about the other's part, not mine. And it happens when we have the capacity to get equal parts from the Commonwealth. It doesn't matter if we have something more or less than the others. The matter energizing envy is the commonality of the source, not the size or shape or even the value of that thing. I will give an example how envy is being legitimized to legitimize that harsh competition, not undemocratic competition in Turkey among different political camps, let's say. This is a quotation from a viral anonymous writer, pro-AKP writer. I think he was not a writer, but a group of people wanted to legitimize Turkey's intervention in Syria, but how he is using envy to legitimize that politics is really interesting. He says, quoting, "The war has been existing since Abel and Cain and will be existing until the apocalypse. The stupid heads who forget Allah examined Moses and his followers with war, and the nations who do not war are destined to die. Those countries do not want war will be like Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. This country, Turkey, will fight not only until we get Aleppo, Mosul, and Kirkuk, but also till justice rule the whole world. If Turks do not accept this mission, it will be given to another nation. If this task is taken out our hands, our nation cannot survive." Now, the subject of the envy is something like a curse, but still he is envious about that. And that curse will provide a sort of power to nation for him. Another example I will give from Erdogan's speech of Erdogan. This speech was given to Imam Hatip schools, those religious schools in Turkey. That now Erdogan uses these religious schools to build his religious generation. But first, Imam Hatip schools, Imam Hatip high schools in Turkey was established by the secular party. So he reminds this story to his youngsters, and then the Imam Hatip graduates, and the association of Imam Hatip graduates, and then how he is boosting envy and resentment together is really interesting, I should say. And quoting, "They opened these schools to train people to wash the corpses to make them ghasals. That's the reason our teacher asked us, are you going to be a corpse washer? Someone they wanted to be ghasal became the president. Imam Hatip graduates came to all the positions in this country that those seculars, couldn't accept. It is better to be oppressed 1,000 times than to be a tyrant once." While he was, this speech was given last year in September, while he was talking, while he was giving this speech, 70,000 students were in jail, in prisons of Turkey. So how he is also legitimizing that fact via this how to say, envious speech he gives to his people, let's say. And there is also a tragicomic aspect of envy about consumption. I will give a last example regarding that aspect of envy, and then I will finish. This lady, this quote is from one of the interviews I did during my PhD in a higher class religious gated community in Istanbul. And the lady is a sort of life coach, let's say, easing polygamous men's burden by setting unofficial but secret contracts among their wives. You know, she has such a profession. And I'm quoting, "It is true that religious women devote themselves to shopping. I want to drive the best car, live in the most luxurious house, wear the best dress. It doesn't mean I waste my money. In this case, it is something else. If God gives me this life as a gift, I'm responsible for taking care of it in the best way. God will not question me about why my husband didn't love me or cheated on me, but God will ask why I didn't like myself." So how how I mean, envy is now sort of legitimizing that sort of consumption, and she is actually a kind of building a sort of theology of envy. And my conclusion, my last paragraph, for many people like this lady, the AKP is a provider and guarantor of this heavenly life in the profane world. Thus, whenever somebody complains about what the AKP and Erdogan do, for example, in the elections, another type of resentment rises, the resentment of rich and the oppressor to the poor and oppressed. It is possible to hear such sentences in the street interviews made with the pro-AKP people. Hey, I know you are envious about what we have because you have nothing. We have Erdogan, you do not have a leader, even a leader. It is just a vicious circle and needed to be broken as soon as possible. There is also a sort of envy in this type of resentment, that is the envy towards the moral superiority of the enemy, as these guys know how their enemies feel, because they were in their enemy's place just a couple of decades ago. What stops them being a little bit more empathetic with the poor and their competitors is obvious. They instinctively know how strong those feelings are, and that is why they are afraid. That fear increases the dose of resentment. Never ends, but yeah, maybe we can discuss and find a way to end these hard feelings. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Isa. You kind of like really presented like very Baroque picture behind the governance and election processes of Erdogan. It's a lot to unpack, really. When we speak about election, we somehow always think that we have in mind those voters that can and want and able to vote. But the reality is more complex than that. There are communities that still don't have full access to expressing their political will, and their voices often suppressed and unheard. And I would like to move to our next speaker, Paul Demain, who has a very impressive portfolio and experience as a journalist and activist, defining the rights of his community. And he is a community of indigenous and American Indians. Paul is a citizen of the Oneida Nations of Wisconsin, known also as a Bear Clan. So he will be speaking about the particularities of that rural communities that he knows very well about, and in relation to possibility and rights to express their political desire and wills and defend their rights. Paul, the floor is yours, please.
Bonjour and Dinoi Magnaduk Skabewis Indigenikas. I want to say hello to all my friends and relatives, fellow relatives across the earth today. And if I appear to be a little bit tired, it's because we are on the edge of probably one of the most historical events to occur in an awful long time. And I've been up late night and early this morning trying to prepare for it. So I wanted to just make a couple comments about what I've heard. Number one, work for an organization called Honor Their Earth, Minnesota, which Winona LaDuke, a Harvard-educated indigenous activist, has operated for many years. And we found that music and artwork is an essential element to our battle against industrialized, environmentally damaging programs. So I really encourage people to continue to do that. But my presentation today, I'm going to put on the screen now and share and see if we have that up there. Okay, and it's called invisible, gerrymandered, and suppressed, which is pretty much the indigenous experience in the United States. I mean, there's lots of experience in the United States we could talk about today, but I want to remind people that there are over 500 federally recognized tribes and remnant land bases in the United States that are controlled by American Indians and indigenous communities in the 50 states. And that on those 500 reserved areas and land bases, there are many, many different configurations that observe that. I mean, the largest tribe being the Navajo Nation, which is as big as half of northern Wisconsin and is actually gerrymandered or cut in jurisdictionally into 4 different states in the United States: Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and one other one I can't think of right at the moment. So there's a lot of different experiences that each one of those tribal governments and citizens might experience within their own area, because they're guided, generally speaking, by the state laws that overlap them. And there are 50 different configurations. The election in the United States is not just in a national vote, it is 50 or more smaller units that each report and conduct their own votes and are guided by their own regulations. And then finally, before I get into this presentation here, I wanted to mention that I have been involved in third-party politics in the United States. I ran the vice presidential campaign for Winona LaDuke on the Green Party in the year 2000. So I'm not unexperienced in both the impact and potential of third-party politics and things like balance of power voting attempts in the United States. And that's how I see the Native community having its best ability to exercise its right to vote is in the balance of power, perhaps not being a Democrat or a Republican or affiliated with any of the other 7 presidential candidates that are on the election today in the United States, but holding that balance of power and exercising it both at the county level and the state level, and then at the federal level, in a way that means that both those political parties, or all political parties, need to answer to the needs and desires of the Native community. So let's move into this presentation. What I want to show you today is some examples of some of the impediments that Native tribes, tribal governments, and indigenous citizens in the United States are facing. So let's take a look at what is probably a typical map representing out of the 500 tribal governments, probably about 450. The smallest reservations are in California. Some of them are actually in acres of 150 acres at a time. The Navajo Reservation, again, several 100,000 acres of land encompassing a land base in 4 different states. This is the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin's reservation, remnant, a tribe that was once part of the Iroquois Confederacy in New York that migrated to Wisconsin in the 1800s. The reservation was 70,000 acres. You see that represented by the purple lines. You see already that the lines of the reservation were drawn in a pretty particular manner, and that was to accompany either jurisdictional issues in 1824 or the fact that there were non-Indian individuals that claimed certain land within the reservation. You'll see that off to the right side of the map in a configuration that just doesn't make sense. Why wasn't it just square? The red and orange components within this reservation map are lands owned by the Oneida Nation. The white areas are land ownerships that were lost. My grandmother's 80-acre allotment on the Oneida Reservation was lost through legal dealings in the middle of a winter when she was trying to feed her family, and a local social service officer offered to provide her with food and other comfort in return for the title of her 80 acres. And she wanted to feed her family that day, and that's what she did. And that represents one of the little white chunks of land. The other notable thing that is right down the middle of the reservation, there is a creek and some roads that go down there that you can see. The middle of the reservation running north and south is the divisional line between two counties. So right away, the reservation is gerrymandered between two county communities. And so in local elections, the individuals, the Oneida citizens that live on this reservation, their voting capabilities already diminished by 50%. Look at the upper right-hand corner and you'll see a complex street plan. That's the overlapping city of Green Bay infringing upon the Oneida Reservation, something that the Oneida tribe cannot do because they don't own the land within those areas. And there's actually two different village jurisdictional components within that land base. Let's take a look at the city of Green Bay. That's the upper right-hand corner. Again, in pink, you see the Oneida Reservation, which means that not only is it divided between two counties to dissipate their voting power, part of the city of Green Bay, which then creates another voting jurisdictional element that infringes upon the ability of the citizens of the Oneida Nation to vote in one block with one voice. Let's take a look at the next village over to the left of the city of Green Bay. That's the village of Hobart, which also infringes upon the Oneida Reservation. So looking back up here, that's all in about the upper right-hand 1/8 of the reservation. So you actually have five jurisdictions. You have the Oneida tribe, you have two counties, you have the village of Hobart, and you have the city of Green Bay infringing upon the reservation. That means that there are likely to be at least 5 different voting jurisdictions, all containing a whole host of different local representatives like mayors and city council members and county assessors and township village personnel. Going back down to that, so you can see that right away, it divides the reservation up among several different jurisdictional situations. Another example is the Lakudere Ojibwe Reservation that I reside on in northern Wisconsin. This is how the county is divided. And for the most part, these jurisdictions are in square blocks that make jurisdictional sense in terms of groups of people in certain areas having common interests. Well, in the middle of the county jurisdictional boundaries, these are townships that you're seeing: Lenroot, Spider, Hayward. Even smaller jurisdictions within the county are broken up into about 18 different jurisdictions. Over in the middle and on the left, you see some that are configured differently. And what it is it encompasses the Lakudere Ojibwe Reservation. And you can see those jurisdictional divisions a little bit better here. Right in the center there is 6 different local jurisdictions. So today, people who are, for example, we'll go back to this one, voting in a little village of Reserve. And they are jurisdictionally divided in between a township called the town of Hayward, in which you have to literally drive 35 miles to get to the polling place. Across the street, your neighbor may be going to the town of Bass Lake, around this lakes area here, which is a part of the reservation. To the south of that is a village of Reserve noted on this, except that the village of Reserve actually sits on the corner and intersection of 3 different townships. So you might get up this morning and have to drive 35 miles north to go to a township to cast your vote. The neighbor across the street has to drive 25 miles south to vote, and the neighbor to the right side of your own house might have to drive 25 miles off the reservation to cast their vote. Again, this is how the reservation boundaries were developed in the 1800s, and just simply causes a lot of confusion. And so those are kind of examples of what indigenous people are facing today. In Montana, they might be facing a 100-mile ride into a jurisdiction off of the reservation in which all the officers and polling officials are non-natives. And we've already had incidents today. At least one individual reported to his polling place. He had received an absentee ballot. He decided not to cast that absentee ballot. It arrived in his mailbox with his name on it, address, voting number, registration form, and everything. He went to the polling place. He wanted to present the absentee ballot, which can be destroyed on site, and he wanted to vote in person. He was told by the polling individual sitting at the desk that he wasn't on the voter rolls. So the question is how did he get an absentee ballot sent by the same voting clerk if he wasn't on the polls? We know that up until the 1960s, American Indians were not allowed to vote. We know that in the 60s, there was the Indian Civil Rights Act that was passed and other acts of Congress that provided greater voter protections to communities of color and people in the United States. But we had people who were turned away in the Kennedy election off of the reservation. They were told that they needed to go back to the reservation to vote on them. Part of the other problem is in this gerrymandering, many of these reservations about 15 years ago didn't have street addresses. They were in rural areas. They've now been told that individual American Indians need to have a street address. If they didn't have a street address and were getting their mail in a local post office box in the closest village, have had to establish voting sites, voting addresses by GPS. And many tribes are issuing those addresses based on GPS on what an address might look like if it had been established on that reservation. So we're facing a number of situations today in regards to low-income individuals, people who are homeless, people who have shortage of housings on reservations. My grandson in the last year has been in my trailer in the backyard, over to auntie's in the basement, has a room over at another uncle's house now. Pretty flexible, but if he doesn't have an established address that he's lived at, or a photo ID that reflects that, or a utility bill or something, he will be barred from exercising his right to vote today. So there are a lot of impediments in the Indigenous community, and but we do know that we have that balance of power that when exercised and when we get them to the polls can be very, very influential. Donald Trump lost the state of Wisconsin by 22,300 votes 4 years ago. The Native community has about 25 to 30,000 eligible voters. If none of them voted in the 2016 election and the statistics were similar today and they got out and voted, the Indian community in the state of Wisconsin would hold the balance of power between the Republicans and Democrats. And while I'm very much a Democratic, progressive, liberal activist in my activities, the balance of power for Indigenous community is a much more powerful position that I advocate for. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much, Paul. It was very interesting and very educational, I think especially for the audiences outside the US. And I think many countries...
one thing I had a note here that the Republicans have filed over 400 lawsuits in various states challenging ballots, 127,000 ballots cast at a drop-off point yesterday. You'll be hearing, if you're watching the news, all day long, you're going to hear state and federal rulings for or against those lawsuits.
Right. Thank you for this edition. And I think generally we more and more every year hear about different cases of suppressing voters. And of course, it's happening not only in the US, we know about many cases in Russia when voters, for instance, would be coming to their voting stations and they would realize that their names are not on the list because they are in the list of dead voters, or they come alive to this voting station, willing to express their political will, and they can't because for the state they're dead. Interesting how the governments in the state use very mischievous mechanisms of suppressing already suppressed communities, and those communities who initially have less access to voting, and how lack of infrastructure is also being a big barrier in especially rural areas of bigger countries. And I think Russia and Turkey are also examples of such suppression of voting behavior and voting possibilities. I want to move on to our next speaker, and I think in some ways she will also continue this line of manipulation of ideology and working with different communities. Tala Kieran is our next speaker, and she is a multidisciplinary artist and educator who is based in New York City. And her performances, videos, and installations focus on the formation of violence, ideology, and political identity. Her recent solo exhibitions include the Great Seal at IBM in New York and the Center for Contemporary Art in Tel Aviv, and Heat Signature at Ludlow 38 Mini-Goethe Institute, also in New York. And Tala's first US Museum solo exhibition is scheduled for 2021, and I hope no coronavirus will prevent her from having this fantastic project that is going to take place at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit. Her work has been shown internationally, and she holds BFA from Bezalel Academy of Art and Design in Jerusalem, and she also earned her MFA from Columbia University in New York in 2016. Tali works a lot with different communities, and today she will talk about her ongoing research in the construction of state power, settler colonial violence, and ideology as she works with and against mechanisms of propaganda. Tali, please, now it's your turn.
Hello. Wow, thank you for this long introduction. I feel very humbled to be here with everyone. And just to give some context, I'm an artist. I'm usually based in Brooklyn. Right now, I'm in Tel Aviv because of the pandemic and various other reasons that also have to do with the current person in government, in the US government. And I'm not an expert on political science or a political expert, but I do in my own work, I often kind of think about the ways in which participation and resistance can be activated through artistic engagement. And I'm going to go through two projects, and hopefully we'll also, I'm looking forward to hearing everyone and take part in the discussion. So, and I am going to read just because it's easier for me. My work from the past years have been shaped through my own relationship to spaces in which hegemonic power is rendered visible. I question how the sites or technologies which I research and film manifest and represent structural or direct violence and inequality, and how these are tied to histories of settler colonialism and ethno-racial supremacy. The crisis of Western democracy, which is exacerbated during the pandemic, forces us to look deep into the systems which govern our lives. I personally come from a government that is now moving towards its fourth election cycle in 2 years. But Israel's so-called Jewish democracy has from its outset been built on exclusion, expulsion, and erasure of Palestinians. At this moment, there are over 5 million Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza who live either under Israeli occupation or Israeli control and imprisonment. Those do not include the residents of East Jerusalem who can't vote, and the 1948 Palestinians, also referred to as Israeli Arabs, who are often treated as second-grade citizens. In the US, voter suppression, as we've just been discussing, and disenfranchisement of Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, as well as immigrants and other vulnerable communities, expose the racism undergirding the electoral system. And also, as we heard from previous speakers, we have to ask ourselves, does civic participation in the democratic process of election to those who have access to it mean full agency? And again, I just want to say, everyone who can, please go vote. This does not in any way mean that I want to undermine that right. As we know, but we do, as we know all too well, our own psyche is extremely vulnerable to disinformation, biases, fear, and polarizations. These questions around participation, choice, and manipulation have guided me in my work, The Great Seal from 2017. So this work was created just after I moved to New York from Jerusalem and just before the Trump presidency began. Initially, I was interested in looking at the ways in which the rhetoric around religion, nation, ethno-state, divine intervention, and so forth, operated differently or similarly within the US context. And so I decided to focus on conservative evangelical support for Israel and at a specific strand called Christian Zionism. As a result, I approached one of the biggest pro-Israeli lobbies in the US, Christians United for Israel, or in short, CUFI. CUFI, for those who don't know, mobilizes millions of American evangelical conservatives who view Jewish rule over the land of Israel-Palestine as a precondition for Christ's second coming and the imminent battle of Armageddon, a battle in which Jews will either convert or perish. I wanted to locate US-Israel relations within this specific political framework, one in which religion is politicized and the end-time messianic beliefs and biblical prophecies are driving forces for policymaking. So for 2 years, my friends and I filmed at CUFI's DC summits, and these experiences and footage eventually led to the creation of this work, The Great Seal. The work invites viewers to step on an imagined stage at the annual DC Summit of Christians United for Israel, and to take on the role of keynote speakers. By using presidential teleprompters and karaoke sing-along machines, participants are then invited to perform speeches compiled from those delivered at past CUFI summits. The participants also receive cues via headphones to raise, lower their voices, and change their posture. And throughout this interactive performance, visitors stand on a rug printed with the design for the original Great Seal of the United States, first proposed by Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson in 1776, subsequently rejected by Congress. This image frames America as a new chosen Zion, in which Moses is depicted as looking at the promised land, while Pharaoh and his armies drown in the Red Sea. You see Pharaoh on the right and Moses on the left, and this vagina-looking thing is the burning bush. This symbol draws links to the founding myths of the US and Israel as two so-called chosen nations fighting an eternal enemy in the form of a shape-shifting pharaoh. So I'm going to share a video and I hope, can you hear the sound? Okay.
The Great Seal is an interactive installation. The work is activated as a viewer steps on an imagined political arena, imprinted with Thomas Jefferson's rejected design for the Great Seal of the United States.
Welcome. Thank you for coming. Please assume your position at the microphone and put on the headphones. Look forward into the teleprompters.
Participants begin with a motivating warm-up.
It's an honor to be here.
Then, they take on the role of the keynote speakers at the Washington, D.C. annual summit of the powerful pro-Israeli lobby group Christians United for Israel.
When you go to Capitol Hill, I want you to deliver one single powerful message.
Raise your voice again.
Say, Israel has the right to the borders established by God, because Messiah is coming. He's coming to Jerusalem, the city of God. The city of God. To show our support. Let us shout together. We are united for Israel. Ready? Go! We are
So though this piece looks at a specific political phenomenon, it also asks wider question about the lure of populism and confronts the participants with their own choices. They can stay, resist, linger, remain silent. The work does not exist without their presence. It simply falls asleep. So basically you enter and it kind of wakes up. In many ways, this invisible screen, the teleprompter, which has been shaping the standardization of speech, has become a contested symbol. As Netta Alexander, who's a media scholar, and I claim in a shared paper we're writing about the teleprompter, instead of a memory aid, the teleprompter has come to symbolize the kind of old politics that populist leaders around the world are promising to replace. It is no surprise that Trump has been attacking the use of a teleprompter since the beginning of his presidency. And now very quickly, I want to go to another project, which is an ongoing collaborative project, which also talks about the failures and vulnerabilities of American democracy. At the core of this ongoing collaboration with Alex Strada, this project is titled Fictive Witness. It is a lecture performance series that originated at the Goethe Institute in 2018 in New York. The series uses our film, Save the Presidents, as a point of departure. The film is structured over the course of the day, and the film depicts a field of cracked and decaying presidential monuments and the manual labor that takes place around them. Alex and I see these cracks as fissures of opportunity to unpack oppressed American histories and to politically imagine what else might be possible. We are also interested in these busts as representations of whitewashing of history. For each fictive witness performance, we invite a different speaker to present a layer of narration over this film that relates to themes that lay beneath its surface. So rather than a literal description, these interventions speak to the gap between monumental representation and historical narratives that are all too often forgotten, overlooked. So when we had this live in 2018, we collaborated with legal scholar Kendall Thomas and with architectural theorist Mabel O. Wilson on the right and philosopher Drusilla Cornell on the left to explore ideas, in the right and left of the image, to explore ideas including political branding, the colonial histories of property rights, and ethical feminism. And now in light of the current events, we decided to return to Fictive Witness this fall with 3 Zoom lecture performances in October, November, and December. The series opened with The Imperial Presidency and Police Power, where sociologist Alex S. Vital and historian Nikhil Paul Singh individually and collectively engage with the histories of policing in the United States and calls for abolition. So I'm going to share a very short clip from Alex S. Vital's. So Alex is narrating the film, basically. It's running, and every time the silent film gets re-narrated and unpacked again and again and again.
We need to completely rethink the scope and intensity of policing. Why have we turned every social problem under the sun over to the police to manage? This represents a kind of profound political failure. Why? Well, because political officials in both political parties have become invested in a kind of bipartisan consensus that in the face of global competition, all they can do is embrace a kind of neoliberal austerity politics in which they subsidize the already most successful people in the economy in hopes that some of their success will trickle down to the rest of us. But this trickle-down economics hasn't worked. It hasn't produced a robust, successful middle class. It's produced the highest levels of inequality in the nation's history. And as part of that, it has produced mass homelessness, mass untreated substance abuse and mental health problems, mass participation in black markets of drugs and sex work and stolen goods, failed schools, failed social programs, and a declining social safety net. And then, rather than addressing those problems at their roots, those problems are criminalized. People at the losing end of those arrangements are defined as culturally deviant, morally inadequate, who will only respond to the threats and violence of policing and mass incarceration.
So on November 14th, we will have our next lecture performance with interdisciplinary scholar Noliwe Rooks, whose lecture will center on the histories of educational integration within the public school systems. And she will be joined by Whitney Stevenson from Teens Take Charge to discuss strategies for educational justice. So I'm actually using this as an opportunity to invite everyone who's watching to please join us and have a look at the Goethe Institute's website. And as an artist, and as a teacher, I just want to say that the kind of constant work of unpacking, unlearning, and hopefully repairing is a very tedious one. And as a teacher and artist, I do believe in the possibilities of these disciplines to be tools for political engagement and social change, and their ability specifically to generate a space for nuanced discussions and dialogue. And I very much am, again, very happy and honored to be here with everyone and hear all the fascinating talks and from different parts of the globe that we all in many ways share a common issues we are tackling. And I am grateful that we will be able to be in a shared discussion as well. So.
Anya, мы тебя не слышим.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just realized. Tala, thank you so much for your amazing presenting us amazing works that you conduct together with your colleagues and people from different academic fields. And thanks a lot. So we're moving to our last presenter. And I wanted to say that political education and political empowerment and access to knowledge, especially for younger generation, I think is an essential aspect to discuss within the topic of voting. And Idris Goodwin being for last 2 decades engaged with the pedagogical and social practice. And Idris wears several hats. He's a breakbeat poet, playwright, creative organizer. He's a director of the Colorado Spring Fine Arts Center and Colorado Colleges. And Idris, the floor is yours, please.
All right. Hello, everyone. You're going to hear, much like the title would suggest, you're going to hear a lot of the same ideas and themes come up again. And I think that's a particularly exciting thing for me to hear. Many of the things that I'm thinking about and gnawing on, iterated in so many different ways. So again, my name is Idris Goodwin, he, him, his, and I'm broadcasting to you today from Colorado Springs, Colorado, where I am the director of the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center at Colorado College, which is located in the unceded territory of the Ute peoples, and the earliest documented peoples also include the Apache, Arapaho, Comanche, and Cheyenne. I also need to send gratitude, mercies, and solidarity to all those who are putting their bodies and health on the line to demand that which this country's documents promise, and those putting their bodies in the line to heal, aid, and educate others in the midst of multiple pandemics. I appreciate the invitation today very much. As a U.S. citizen, a Black man, a father, and a descendant of formerly enslaved people who migrated from the southern states due to all manner of terror and intimidation, which included voter suppression. This theme is very personal and concerning to me. As I mentioned before, I'm a relatively new director of a multidisciplinary venue, a professional theater, an art museum, and an art school, all 3 of which are closed or have limited access because of COVID. We're part of a college, so there's students milling about, masked and distanced, and we're soldiering on, doing the best we can. And we're pivoting like everyone is. Back in March, when things got really real, my mind immediately went to thoughts of the remix. Let me go. Let's see. There we go. So a remix is a verb and a noun. So to remix literally is what it sounds like, to mix again. The second, the noun is that it is a variant of an original recording as of a song made by rearranging or adding to the original. Remixing, as I came to know it, interpreted by hip hop producers and DJs, is connected to the innovations of those first turntablists who transformed record players into instruments. But even beyond the technical, I want to talk about the spirit, the conceit to dig through the past recorded sounds as a means to create new sounds, new things. This is one of my favorite albums, Fear of a Black Planet by Public Enemy. This album is almost entirely made up of sampled sounds. Pretty much everything you hear, other than the voices of the lead vocalist Chuck D and Flavor Flav, as well as a few guests, are the only quote unquote original sounds. It is basically built up of previously recorded sounds that have been rearranged, taken apart, recontextualized. So the question is what is this, right? But when you listen to it, it sounds like absolutely nothing else. So it is both the remnants of the past, but something completely forward facing. I grew up on heavily sampled and collaged music. I am a child of the breakbeat. Here we have Grandmaster Flash from the West Bronx, one of the innovators of the crossfader, which you see him using. And what he's doing is basically making a new beat out of two of the same records, taking one small part of one small song and going back and forth to create a new beat. A breakbeat is what happens when you break the rules, when you break the pattern, when you disrupt the flow of expectation, when you use the record player in a manner in which it was not designed. Hip hop, a multidisciplinary art form born from the innovative creativity of Black and brown kids in a post-industrial, pre-digital American city, invented the remix. They used their lack of resources as opportunities to create groundbreaking new forms of art and industry. They invented the remix, taking old things and making it newer and fresher and more exciting. In a moment where the nation finds itself demanding and fomenting critical change politically, socially, economically, those who have carried the fire sparked by those innovative kids of the South and West Bronx have much to teach us about how to rebuild from the ashes. For the purposes of this presentation, let's think of the arts less as products, objects of commerce, but rather modes for platforming others, for education, for political action, for the exchange of ideas, for building infrastructures. I'm going to reference hip hop a lot, but this is not really about the entertainment industry, the marketing and selling of songs and clothes. I'm focused more on the anthropological, the cultural intersection, the innovators of turntablism, rapping, breaking, aerosol, art, etc. I'm more interested in their intuitive philosophies and the core values that birthed the thing that we called hip hop before it entered the factory. But first, I want to go back to the 70s, the 1770s. What you're seeing here is a painting by John Trumbull from 1817, and it depicts the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776 in the United States of America. So the American dream, or what I call the American promise, was put together by all these gentlemen you see here who were fleeing in a monarchy. And the promise is that through hard work and perseverance, anyone can achieve prosperity and elevate themselves and their families, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the context is everything. This didn't include everyone. Here's the same picture again, but a documentary filmmaker named Arlen Parsa took it upon himself to put red dots on all the faces of the men who owned slaves at the time of the signing. America was founded on great contradiction, exclusion, and theft. So the pursuit of happiness for everyone who was in that room. And notice who was not in that room. Certainly not the Africans that these people, many of them, more than half of them, had enslaved. Certainly not their wives or their daughters, no children, no young people in there. certainly no Native Americans or indigenous folks. So this pursuit, this promise was really only made to the people in that room. So for example, you have the Chinese Exclusion Act, you have the Indian Removal Act, you have Jim Crow and segregation, you have grandfather clauses and poll tax that don't allow Blacks recently freed from centuries of bondage to the opportunity to vote. And as I speak now, there are attempts at throwing out votes, as it was referenced before by Paul. There's a thing called voter suppression, even in 2020. So really what we're still dealing with is the same contradiction, truth, but contradiction of what the American promise is. It's a promise that was made to a select core. And we still see that, and we're still fighting that now. So naturally, resistance came in all forms. So despite centuries of systemic exploitation, abuse, and exclusionary practices aimed at those not inside, made it clear that the promise was only to its authors. Over time, hearts and minds evolved to expand who was allowed inside, but it did not come without bloodshed, struggle, resistance. And that resistance was fueled mostly, and many times, by speeches, by poetry, by song, by theater, all forms of the arts. Which brings us to the Bronx. I know I'm jumping ahead many centuries, but again, you know what we're talking about is a lineage of expression from marginalized people, and more specifically in this instance, those of the African diaspora on the North American continent. So the Bronx in the late 60s, early 70s was on fire, neglected, broken apart by an interstate, ignored. And in the midst of that, still you had these children who were repurposing. Still expressing their joy and their insistence to thrive and exist against a crumbling infrastructure, but not solely with benevolence. Martin Luther King Jr. says that a riot is the language of the unheard, which is why in 1977, when the New York City blackouts occurred, many folks took advantage of the city's vulnerabilities. And in addition to clothing stores, food stores, liquor stores, etc., many record stores were also looted. And shortly after, hundreds of DJs, new sound systems popped up all across the West and South Bronx. While it is true that ill-gotten means were utilized in order to get these new things, they took it to the parks, they took it to the public, they took the equipment outside and gave music to the people. Jerry-rigged light posts to get power and shared with the people, created break beats, took them apart in order to give space for dancers and poets to express, in order to create spaces where different gangs could commingle peacefully and build and create a new thing. In this setting, you're seeing an intersection of the sound clashes of Kingston, Jamaica, against the post-industrialized South Bronx, against street gangs who infuse existing forms with an urban polycultural sensibility, the Western couplet of English poetry reimagined by the footwork and Southern drawls of Muhammad Ali, James Brown, advertising fonts and large-scale lettering, the turntable itself repurposed to create new out of old, pop art, Basquiat, Debbie Harry, vinyl, the death of vinyl, the rebirth of vinyl, the invention of the crossfader, white flight, the flattened cardboard box, Martha Cooper, linoleum, spray can etiquette, the irony of Sugar Hill Gang's Rapper's Delight, the crack cocaine epidemic, Reaganomics, sampling, drum machines, beat machines, and the b-boy stance. And let's again remember the same radical exclusionary tactics that we saw depicted in the painting also was trickling into the art world as well, which had really built itself around preservation, requirements within the space being money, education, etc. So the remix hip-hop culture defies a notion of ownership defies a notion of preservation, finds a way to hold both preservation and innovation and access at the same time, acknowledges the past and the history, what's in the crates, but also understands the dire need for evolution. The remix reminds us that constructions are imagined before they are built, and deconstruction is the breaking down. Reconstruction is the rebuild, but the remix is about integration, a return, but also taking the parts that are best to allow others to fully and publicly and three-dimensionally be themselves. This is my message to any and all who represent those not represented in Trumbull's painting. Your task is to be fully, publicly, three-dimensionally visible and publicly alive, and in celebration if you can. Lucio Clifton writes, "Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and failed." I want to read you all something because I'm first and foremost, much like Tali mentioned, I'm certainly not a political scientist. I'm first and foremost a writer, a creative, but I do think that what voting suppression speaks to is an attempt to erase certain individuals. And so for me, art is about the insistence to exist, the insistence to be seen and heard. This is a piece called Taken from my book, Can I Kick It? The takers, talking about take some country back because all they know is take. Took lands from the indigenous, took the Indian and saved the child, took the profile, the headdress, the names, the prophet, took Africans, took the Bible, made it a noose, took the cross, set it blazing, took Japanese, took Semitic lives, took limbs of poplars, adorned them with bleeding ornaments, took pictures, took time to hear the case, heard the case, took it to the furnace, hid ashes under the bed, took the sheets off and cut eye holes, take and take this, take that, took jazz, blues, dance moves, dap, dab, made him cornball, whack ass, Pat Boone, Elvis, Vanilla Ice, Justin Timber, took publishing, took credit, took up all the space, all four walls of the library, took all the gunpowder in the cannon. And when we took samples for our raps, you took us to court. When it's you who took the cookies out the cookie jar, take that, take that, take that. Take our leaders to the grave, take their visages, dismember, distort, appropriate their message, use their message to sell this, sell that, need to take a seat, take a step back, but you can't take it in the dark. So you cry about taking when all you do is take this, take that, but we won't be took, hoodwinked, or bamboozled. We can't be taken to the river and told not to drink. We are hungry, never thirsty, special set of skills. All of us won't be, cannot be, never again taken. We are still having to say Black Lives Matter. We are seeing in Native and Indigenous communities the legacy of violence, neglect, and theft. We are seeing the effects of who is not in the room when that document was signed. The insistence and resistance to trouble the American promise is urgent and critical. To blend hip hop's promise of community in the conversation, platformed by the philosophy that radical access and inclusion is key to democracy, and to rob anyone of their vote is like pulling the plug out of the speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Idris. It's really sounded as a manifesto from the beginning till the end, especially the poetry. Thanks a lot. I mean, so amazing presentations. I love all of them. And I think they're in some way or another, they're really like connected or building some bridges between each other. And we open for discussions and questions, and maybe you guys want to ask questions of each other, and we will also might have some questions from the chat. I don't see any questions though, but anyways, anyone have any questions?
I have a question. I think this is also something we were discussing with you, Anna, when we were thinking about planning this panel. And today we're talking a lot about uh, suppression of voters, but we didn't really touch upon the topic of suppression of candidates, which I think is also very important, especially in case of Russia and Belarus. And also, we're talking a lot about where have all the good candidates gone, because we often are put in the situation when we have to choose between evil and less evil. So, and if we're talking about democracy and elections and representations and inclusion, we should also consider the theme of who are we electing, not that only we are allowed to vote and be present through our through expression of our political will, but who do we trust and who do we see in this kind of shared future? And my question is probably to Greg about how do we kind of reimagine the political candidates and and maybe not only to him, but also to all of you guys, how do we kind of redesign and remix the candidate?
Well, that's actually what everyone's been thinking about for the last decade, because this is exactly the period that we used to call the surge of populism. Well, many people believe that populism is the way to abuse democracy or the way uh, to distort democracy or even perhaps demolish it. But I think it would be fair to say that, well, actually, populism emerges out of deficit of democracy, out of this very long, protracted technocratic rule, where the politicians we are seeing on the ballot, we're seeing on the TV, are basically not that different from each other. So for that reason, I think it is fair to say that these people simply don't represent the real cleavages that are there in the society. They don't really represent the issues that the people are worried about. And populism is probably a way to inject some energy into this liberal democratic mechanism by making the issues that people are really worried about more tangible, by making them seen. And I think that, well, basically, this range of populist leaders that we have witnessed recently, it is a reflection of this demand for not simply for strong political leadership, but also for those who wouldn't be shy to represent, to reflect the real issues that are out there. Well, probably they don't deliver, but still we can see that they're trying at least to answer this growing demand. It's growing everywhere in countries of liberal democracy, from the United States to Russia, and from the United Kingdom to Turkey.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say too that when you said populism, it made me think of that. I think there's a disconnect where people actually think that's what Trump was, that he was this sort of Jimmy Stewart, like Frank Capra character, this ordinary guy who's going to go to White House and clean it up. But really, what he actually is a failed insider. That he's somehow like you can't be like a millionaire, billionaire, and kind of like project that monopoly Park Place idea and also try to be like, gee golly gosh, folksy guy. And so but I do think to this thing about populism, it had me thinking about I feel like and I'm gonna say it's gonna sound lofty, but I think it's kind of our only hope is that we have got to get money out of politics. Like the fact that like even people I want to succeed, I'm like constantly having to donate to them and all this kind of stuff. Like there needs to be a cap. There needs to be a cap on salaries. There needs to be a cap on how much they can raise, and we just have to approach it a whole way. Because if a senator or a president was making what a public school teacher made, you would see very different kinds of people running. And so I think that the fact that it is so entrenched and there's so much money involved, it immediately creates such a wedge between, like, it's impossible to actually be, a populist, truly, when you have to raise so much money, so much volumes of cash to even get in the office. It only invites certain levels of corruption and bias and exclusion of those without means. Like, by its very framework and nature, it invites corruption, so that's sort of my big lofty dream is that is the kind of remixing, is just let's completely rethink what a politician, and like let's actually just stop calling them politicians. Like, these are just policymakers and advocates and community. When everyone called Obama, when they said community organizers, this dirty word, I was like, what's wrong with that? Like, that's what he's doing. That's what they do, right? Like, that's what they do. All these nuts driving around with the trucks and the flags. I mean, that's a community, believe it or not. I mean, it's a scary one, but that's a community, right? So anyway, I'm rambling, but you know what I'm saying.
I wanted to add a little bit too from my perspective, and that is I think that around the country today, there are a lot of localities and states that are voting on different configurations. And I know that citizens in the United States are going to have a big discussion about how the Electoral College works. I think people are going to be looking at the issue of the census and new maps that are done every 10 years in the United States. And just the idea that the United States as a democracy, whatever that may be, is an infant in world politics. I mean, the Iroquois Confederacy was perhaps 1,000 years or more, and we see governments who've lasted long times. The United States, being 200 years old, is still an infant in terms of operating and still guiding its thing. So some of these initiatives at the local level, I agree, we need more human beings and people like grandmothers and wives and people of color rather than politicians, and the money needs to get out of the process because it's really holding back proper representation. But some of these new configurations like ranked choice voting, which allows you to cast several votes and find a plurality and a consensus, are probably positive initiatives, just like some of the states who are already have been doing absentee early balloting for years and doing it very successfully. So I'm encouraged by some of the referendums that are on the ballot.
I have a question to Tala about the, I mean, unfortunately, I haven't been interacting with your, with any of your works, but I'm just curious about the participants and reactions of those people that are being part of your performances.
Is there, which one are you talking about, the teleprompter?
Yes.
So I think that, I mean, it really depends. As I was saying, there's something very tempting about the work. Like, you're not exactly sure even what you're stepping into initially. And as you're kind of participating, you have this moment of, wait, what am I actually saying? What do I actually know about this? Should I stay or should I go? And there's something that I think as someone who was in those settings and filming in those spaces, I kind of wanted to translate what this, emotional roller coaster of speaking about politics, but speaking about the end time, like kind of what happens through that process of manipulation. So, or even just like for someone who is from a different political spectrum, is just like being open to having that influence me. And I wanted to think about what choice you have when you're standing there, and what choices you're making, and are you playing along or are you leaving? And and people usually, I mean, it's something about this kind of reperforming that happens about, because there are people who change the words, there are people who stay, there have been mothers who have completely changed the speeches, there are people who just left, or there are people who stayed and overacted them. So I think it's a work that in some ways, what I did learn, like when I showed it in the US at IBEAM, I think there's something in this work that stays in the body. And I always said that if I'm going to, and it also demands a lot of contextualization and public programming, which is something I also do. I invite different people to activate the work. So because it does register different in different bodies. And I think that what happens is that I think you have to have a feedback almost. I felt like if I was to ever show this again, there's going to be a feedback process. And I do have to also be very honest that I've always shown this work in very liberal settings. So it would be interesting to see how this work functions in other settings, and like, what would that do? Would it just, amplify something, or would it undo something? It's a work with a lot of questions. And I was also made, when I started working on it, no one really thought Trump would be elected. And I came from a place that I've already experienced this kind of rhetoric of fear and mongering hate towards the Arab citizens who were about to vote before the elections. And I kind of felt like, what happens if we take, almost kind of thinking about populism from a leftist perspective, I was like, what if we take this energy? What if we take these questions and we kind of leave that energy in the body, but then redirect it to something else? Like, because I came from a place which has so much stagnation. Now things are kind of starting to be more, bubbly, but it's still the core questions of the inequality, the theft, the base, the racism, the ethno-nationalist kind of framework, the supremacy, all these things that are very much shared in the US. Those are, I think, are the core and the kind of place for a new political imagination. So I think there was something where I was like, what if we just take that messianic thing? What if we just take that zeal and put it in a body that has almost been asleep? And, it's a work with a lot of questions. It was created in a specific time. Now I still work with these, I still work with these voices. I still think I have access to them. I think I need to, as an Israeli, ask what those voices are, what they do. But I also am constantly thinking, how do I undo them? How do I not only demonize, that, but how do I think about these things in a very, not in a personal way? These are this is the founding myths of our nations. So how do we take that and really, kind of deal with it? And then, as, Idris was saying, and Paul, like, how then do we really radically just redistribute resources, opportunities, through education, through art? Like, those are things I really like that you said, Idris, that constructions are imagined before they are built. Like, I think really kind of going through the process, I think in art, thinking about the process of construction and visualizing it, and how our own psyche is constantly being constructed as a playful material, is something that, again, without demonizing, because I think it doesn't help if we're going to polarize one group against the other. But I was like, what if as liberals, we kind of take on that place and see it within ourselves? And everyone can choose differently and kind of think about what that means, not in any like moralist kind of way, but in a space for experimentation.
Yeah, the reason why I asked, because I like in this Great Seal how you penetrate the subculture of political performativity, and how you work with this aspect. And I think that like when you put individuals to experience it through their body, I think that's kind of gain the highest agency of the art. Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions? Maybe from Weisman or comments?
I have a question to Idris.
I think Boris wanted to say something.
Okay. I will hold then. Boris?
I was actually going to say that we are already over time. Being on this institutional...
You're very optimistic one, right?
Yeah, sorry?
No, I mean, you come in with a certain optimism and a good message.
So it's a very optimistic message. We actually have time boundaries on this thing. I did want to ask the artists on the team, how do you think about, and probably Stephen too, how do you think about the actual potential of your works to do the change? Do you think about it as a real possibility, or you prefer not to think about it? Do you think about how do you actually gauge the change that is made?
I'm gonna jump in. Just sorry, just because I have to go to in about 2 minutes. So I'm gonna bow out. I think that is the big question. And it really has to do with how you think about what your impact is. Impact can be very immediate. The projects I'm working on, we want very immediate impact, but it can also be a redistribution of the sensible, fundamentally altering the ways we look at reality, which you can't actually measure the impact of, because if we've actually gotten to that place, all our measurement tools are no longer useful. But to me, because I'm actually very interested in this notion of how do we do this sort of assessment, it really comes down to what does the artist want to do? You can't bring an assessment from the outside. It really has to do with what, and so when I work with artists, I ask them 2 questions. What do you want to do? And how will we know if we've done that? And that opens up the terrain, but it also brings a rigor, and it demands a series of questions that artists need to ask themselves. What do I want to do? Who do I want to do it for? And I think that actually makes for stronger, more impactful work. And I'm so sorry I have to go. I've got student meetings right now. And so it was great to see all of you. And
thank you.
Letting me be part of this.
Likewise.
Thank you very much for joining.
It was lovely
Stephen.
working with you, Stephen,
Yeah.
again.
Good to see
you.
you.
So great to see your face. Thanks
Bye-bye.
a lot. So what the comment of or the answer of Stephen made me kind of still come back to my question to Idris about popular music and the political message embedded into this, and maybe looking at the, I'm also like a big fan of lyrics of the pop songs of the 90s. I think they were very much charged with some reflection on local and global processes. And I was before the discussion, I was doing workout, and I was listening this song of Hathaway, life will never be again, life is changing. So thinking about these lyrics of 1993, I was thinking that maybe you can sort of give us some recap about the political message of this huge platform as pop songs and hip hop. What is your take on that? What is your what it does actually?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, artists, I mean, this is a little bit to Boris's question too. I mean, our job is to reflect, as we make things, we make reflections, we make opportunities for people to reflect, and we document the consciousness or the spirit of the society, so, immediately I think of Kendrick Lamar's, We Gonna Be All Right, which is this very clear anthem for the Black Lives Matter era. And for me, like if I had to pick one song to sort of define the last 10 years, I would pick that song. But I also think about that song by Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, WAP, right? Which is a very perverse, very racy song, an anthem to the female anatomy and their sexuality, but sort of using that sort of hyper exaggerated, hyper hyperbole, that sort of like street corner game of exaggeration that hip hop has a tradition into, which is really about community. Ultimately, it's about an insistence of existence in place. And I think that song to me is also very political and radical as well, because it sort of challenges respectability politics, and it also challenges you know, the long-standing tradition of sort of like mostly male and heteronormative narratives, right? And so to me, it's all political. It's all political because it's just it's all reflections. It comes from somewhere, you know. So as someone who loves music and loves art and all of that, I just view it through that prism. And so, you know, I just think change is what it is. You know, we change, our minds change, our things change, and the artists just reflect that change. We just reflect and document that change. So the art doesn't necessarily change a person. People just change, and we're changing too. The artists are changing, the venues are changing, the curators are changing. You know what I'm saying? So I don't really see it as a 1 + 1 = 2 kind of situation. You know.
Thank you. I also wanted to include Isa into this discussion. I know we don't have that much time left, but maybe it could be the last question or something to address, because we talk a lot about political imagination and the role of art, but I also wanted to talk about the role of freedom of speech and role of media in, you know, mediating certain events and certain processes that are being hidden or maybe underrepresented. And in the situation, in the context of Turkey, like in many contexts today, unfortunately, when media is being suppressed and media is being manipulated and it's dangerous to be a journalist, what do you think are the strategies for maybe creating an alternative journalistic narrative, or finding a way when you can still speak up and talk to people and address very important issues and still stay safe? Your microphone is off.
Thank you very much. Actually, the strategy is in it, because the thing is the whole manipulation regarding the political processes, democratic processes, is very obvious. And Turkish society is a very political society. That's why this manipulation of affects, manipulation of emotions work too much, actually. So everybody knows what is going on, and that's why in the surveys, even ordered by the government, it is obvious that people do not use and do not trust pro-government media outlets. Instead, they use different channels like WhatsApp groups, Twitter, Facebook, social media, and so on. And there are still some journalists, not some actually, there are many journalists now establishing, since years, establishing their own media outlets on Twitter, on like Mediascope. I'm also working for them, like YouTube channels, podcast channels, and so on. There is a danger in a sort of turmoil. We know that the AKP, the government, can control also internet connections, because the owners of the internet connections, the internet companies, are also dependent on government through their economic investment, not because of the laws or legal infrastructure, but through their their economic investments. So it is like very fragile. The alternative mediascape is also very fragile, but it is that there is also a bright side. That you know, in Turkey, the mediascape, the mainstream mediascape was very corrupted for years, for, you know, decades, let's say, since 1980s, since the coup d'etat happened in 1980. The media companies was very corrupted. The relationship between the media and governments were not very clear. Now everything is obvious, so people know that mainstream media don't work, and that's why there is a new kind of media atmosphere is created by the oppositionary, by the not necessarily opposition, by independent journalists and academics and so on. It is not enough. It is not enough. How to say white, because there is no money, let's say. But by the time, if there is a change in the governmental structure, if there is a change, for example, in an election, it is coming, it seems, in next year, there will be an early election because there's a new group of voters. Like they are very young. They were born under the AKP hegemony, let's say, so-called Generation Z, and it seems Erdogan wants to make an election before they could have the right to vote, because it seems these guys don't believe him. These guys will not vote for him. And it is also about the mediascape too. That's why I wanted to put them, because they are the ones most unbelievers of Erdogan. So that's why there will be an election and we will see what is changing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. But I think also maybe Paul could add a little bit on this matter, as you know, a person who's been mediating news of the Indian community, and a person who is a producer for Indian Country TV, and I also think you were running a radio station. So how do this news and information is also kind of being reaching out to smaller communities, and maybe how news of smaller communities reach out to people on the country level? Please turn on, yeah.
Sorry. Well, News from Indian Country, which has gone out of publication after 33 years, definitely served a much smaller community than ever before, with news and information that they thought was necessary. That's why we evolved into Indian Country TV with websites, multiple websites, and all the other social media we have. That's a reflection of what the Native community wanted. They wanted their own voice. And that's where a lot of the organizing is going on. When I came to Le Coudray 50 years ago, there was nearly no voters. And part of the right outreach in terms of giving people voice is something that encourages them to participate in the political, social, religious fabric of other parts of the community, to be understood, to have a seat at the table, I worked in the governor's office where we had 198 appointments to committees and commissions and other operations. We put a Native American on every one of those commissions because they were viable, whether it was the banking commission or the gay and lesbian council or whatever it may be. Our publications, of which there was at one time several hundred, and there's only maybe 100 left in Indian Country, but they've gone to the online media, are all having a tremendous impact on all levels of society, whether it's reflection of tribal courts, whether it's political exercise in political jurisdiction, education systems, owning radio stations, and those kinds of things. So the media plays a huge role in not only representing their community and giving voice to it, but having that mirror back, the reflection. What are the tribal communities reading if they don't trust some of the publications and media institutions around them? They're not looking at that at all, and so they're not being fed good information as well. So I think media has a big influence. I wanted to note one thing again about music and politics and things like that. One of our artists that belonged to our board of directors for a while was Nahko, Nahko. Look at a video, if you can find it online, called Love Letters to God. It's generated millions of views in the last year and a half since it's been produced, and it's in opposition to pipeline and in response to the Dakota Access situation. Very effective in bringing an emotional level to things that allows people to get their foot in the door to participate in other activities. And so music, number one, you can't have a revolution without music. You can't have a revolution without good food. You can't have a revolution without humor. All those elements have to be brought together by all the participants of all kinds of life to make it work. It's not just the front lines that are operating that are going to bring that change. It's got to be everyone. And if you cook really good stuff, then cook good stuff and give it to people that need to be fed who can get out in the field. And with that, I have to leave. I have a line of about 7 people here who have issues about voting today that I got to get back to. But thanks for the invitation and thanks for the information.
Thank you.
Good conversation. Maybe we can have another one on another day under a new administration.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, good luck. Yeah,
Good luck and
we'll
thanks so
continue
much.
talking for sure. But I think in any case, we unfortunately have to finish. And it was a very impressive and very informative and 2 hours of presentations.
Yeah, and I think for me it was also important, I kept thinking that it's a pity that we guys are not meeting offline, because it would be great to see everyone's faces and just be in one room and share the energy. And let's see, it's been a pretty difficult time for all of us, but I feel like we all kind of remain hopeful, and as long as we do, I think we still kind of stay strong. So let's stay strong, let's vote, and let's keep in touch. And thanks very much for this 2.5 hours.
Yeah, we kind of allowed to be pessimistic, guys. Boris, can you say maybe any last words?
Last words, thank you all so very much, and I hope to see you all in person at the Weisman next year when we do get that huge grant.
Yeah.
Yay! The money from politicians, we need to rechannel them.
Yes, we need to redistribute the money and give that to artists. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It was amazing.
Thank you so
And
much, guys.
yeah, we'll put video online if you want to share it with your colleagues, friends, and like-minded people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.